Joining us now for tonight's big close-up is Deputy Ambassador to the United Nations. We're thrilled to welcome Tammy Bruce back with us at the table here. So we got a lot of
change. Nothing happened. You guys are great. You're kicking. Oh, I was going to say a word I can't already.
Well, we got a lot of questions for you, Deputy Ambassador. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you.
A lot of breaking news during our couple hours here. We got New York City news, but we also have news out of Iran with this new supreme leader being chosen. President Trump has signaled previously that he wants to pick the new leader, and he wants someone that can work with the United States. What does the announcement of this new leader mean for the mission?
Well, first of all, no one should stand next to him. That's one of those issues. I think it's fair when you're looking at the nature of what the president's trying to achieve and already has achieved, which is setting that country free and setting the Iranians free. This is good not just for certainly Iran, but for the Middle East and for the world, certainly as a result for the United States. And that's the funny thing about when you are America first, you're looking out for the United States, it ends up being the best thing for the rest of the world. This is, I think, obviously a desperate action. That first strike that was made, I think, decimated that leadership framework by 49 levels. Which is also, I don't know if even someone told this man that he is the new leader, if they warned him. But I think that the president understands what needs to occur. The world understands it. Our allies, the Middle East understands it. And we'll see this play out.
One thing that was reported this week, and, we treated it like it was big news, and I guess it is, but I don't think it was surprising. This idea that Russia had supplied or proffered to Iran some sort of intelligence on where U.S. assets are. Of course, that type of espionage is something that we deal with, and you understand that. How important is it to the U.S. that China and Russia not just stay out of it, but they don't feel like we've drawn them into it?
Well, obviously, I won't speak for the president or the White House. I know the administration's not going to comment on intelligence, whether it's true or not. That's been leaked. What we can say, of course, is that if that ends up being true or anything that disturbs what we're attempting to do, the president has relationships with anyone and would address that directly with Russia himself. That is what the people voted for when they voted for him again. The 2 times they voted for him is that this is a man who's going to do things differently, who's taking charge, who knows everyone, who wants diplomacy first, who wants negotiated solutions first. He clearly, in order for us to be able to function, he must speak to everyone, whether it's China or Russia. And now my being in a multilateral environment, 193 countries across the street from the U.S. mission, is that the world, you've got to talk to them, and they begin to understand and want leadership. That is what President Trump offers the world. They see the difference. And this dynamic right now, clearly, no matter what is going on or if anyone's helping Iran, they're not doing a very good job of it because they're decimated at this point. Now it's a matter of the way forward, and Donald Trump will decide what that way is.
Tammy, with the Ayatollah's son being named the new leader in Iran, it's not lost on me that today is International Women's Day. And I think about all of the women of Iranian society who have endured crushing oppression under his father. And now he is another hardliner here. And if they had any hope that moving forward there would be different freedoms in their life, that seems to be
Of course.
gone.
Well, we've seen that modern Iran in the past. We know what that looks like. 47 years ago, Iran became at war with the whole world for the most part. This is a war that started with that takeover, and President Trump is putting an end to it. And that's what we also want. We want an end to the status quo and not pinprick dynamics that kick the can down the road. But Americans, and through social media, is that we've seen those photographs of Iranian culture, of Iranian society. And of course, we see the same dynamic in Afghanistan. The fact is that the Iranian people clearly are not choosing that guy. The tyrants who have inherited this problem have decided to continue. That's a mistake. President Trump is always open to the nature, as we've seen from the beginning, of trying to find a negotiated way out of these things. And they didn't want that. And so now the president he's going for it. He does this with everything. He wants it to be finished. He wants durable change that he knows when he leaves that this is for generations moving forward. This is why the American people support this. We know it's never easy. The president, I can tell you, I saw the First Lady when she chaired our Security Council at the UN, that both of them care deeply about the people impacted. We know that clearly the president's actions indicate that he would rather have diplomacy. But in this case, the fact that he's launched this indicates how serious the problem was and what he felt he needed to do to get the job done.
Hey, Tammy, thanks again for joining us. It's like you never left. This operation, do you think it would have ever moved forward if we didn't have the Arab coalition that we have in terms of the UAE or Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Jordan, Iraq, Bahrain? It's a different world now than it was, say, in 2003, where these countries may have come to the aid of an Iran. Now, that coalition has been more active and more helpful than we've seen out of France, the UK, or Spain.
Yes, it's a great question. I've enjoyed getting to know many of the people, the representatives from those nations at the UN, and you've had some great clips from Ambassador Mike Waltz. So it's a real, I think, steady way that we're dealing and working with these individuals. But this really started with Trump's first administration and the Abraham Accords and reaching out to nations that normally maybe back and forth or not a lot of good news and problems. But Trump has offered everyone a new way forward with new ideas, really not accepting that this is just the new world order, this horrible dynamic for the people of these other countries. We just have to put up with it. He knows that that's not good enough. But the first thing on his mind is America's safety, is what our loved ones in uniform are going to have to face, what the next generation faces. All of us have pretty much most of our lives dealt with an Iran that's been out of its mind, that is a cancer in the world. That now is over. It is genuinely over. And thank God that it's President Trump, that it is his cabinet, it's Secretary Rubio, Ambassador Waltz, and the whole team at USUN, I have to say, is that the United Nations can be better. The president wants it to be able to help. We're leading that way. And partly it's because we have to engage with the world. The results of this, to your point, Joe, is that nations, when they get to know us, help us, and also move forward when it comes to what's best for America as well.
Deputy Ambassador Tammy Bruce, I have one more question for you.
Yes,
so
ma'am.
we've been talking about this whole show, and I know that part of your role is working with other nations and nation building, so to speak. There are Americans that are concerned about the extent of U.S. and Israeli nation building in Iran. We hope that the Iranian people have self-determination. We hope that they can have a new government and freedoms and all of those things. But there are some Americans that are rather concerned that, to what Joey has said repeatedly, you break it, you buy it. Now we're going to be in an endeavor that's going to be now we rebuild Iran. Now, I know diplomacy is always important, and I know that the Iranian people are important in this, but what do you tell the American people when it comes to the idea of nation building for nation building's sake?
There's a big difference, and everybody's right in the sense of what we've seen before. This is new. It's different. It's a rejection of the old. It's a rejection of the status quo of what we've seen before in what you've exactly described. For Iran, it is not nation building. It's a return of that country to its real self. And the Iranian people have been waiting, and now the wait is over. The Afghanistan people are in the same dynamic. No human being wants to live in the manner that people have been living in those kinds of terrorist nations. It is over, and frankly, those who have not tried to stop it in some ways are complicit by simply letting it go along. It's done now. This is quintessentially Trump. It's that enough is enough, new ideas, a belief that it can change and can endure, and that everyone deserves a better world, and it will fall to us because we are the greatest nation on earth, because we have the power to be able to do it, and that makes it a responsibility of ours. I trust and believe in President Trump because he understands that also. It's an extension of what Americans want, but not in the way it's been done before, in the way that President Trump is doing it now. That's why it will work.
Quickly, so we all woke up and we had struck Iran. I can't say it was a huge secret because we talked about it for a day before. Something's going to happen, something's going to happen, something's going to happen. I don't know if that was intentional or not. I'll presume it was in some ways. With where you work and the access you have to these other countries, we always hear things like, the Arab nations wouldn't mind if you took Iran out, but they don't want to publicly be behind it. We look at things like the way Europe responded immediately after, not letting us use their bases. What was the work at the UN prior to this? In other words, was there an effort to get certain countries on board? Was there an effort to share intelligence and make this a concerted effort, or did we truly take the entire world by surprise?
At the UN, of course, it's the umbrella is the State Department. We implement the president's agenda. So we don't create an agenda or decide how to move forward with something like that. It's really a matter of what the president decides, what his cabinet is doing, and how they move forward. What I can tell you is what everyone knows is the president's been talking about Iran and the problem of Iran for 40 years. 40 years, decades, like every other American after the takeover. And I think that that's been his consistent concern and thought. I think that also, look, we had just, after the 12-day war, right? I mean, we had just engaged in that. The president is one of the most transparent guys that I've ever known in that he tells you what he's going to do. He's like, we're trying this first, we're doing our best, and they better cooperate. He's not trying to trick anybody. He doesn't ambush you. So of course this isn't a surprise, because he will a lot of patience. He'll try to make sure everything has worked. Clearly something broke, and it was, okay, this is not going to work. It doesn't mean he walks away and says, oh, maybe next time. He's a builder. He likes deadlines. Finishing things is important, and he knows that he's got a special impact. We've got 3 years to change the world, and he's doing it. You will look back on this, and you guys are in remarkable positions in reporting the differences that happen each day, is that this is the change that will endure. It will change the world for at least the next 100 years, 5, 6 generations, and it will be because that man had the courage to say, enough is enough, and decided to act. It's a very exciting time.
Tori, can I ask just one quick question with regard to relationships with other countries? What do you make of the pace of the UK right now and Keir Starmer?
Well, his approval rating is quite low in his country. I think what you see in public reports is that people were shocked that he was being so recalcitrant in this regard. He heard certainly, as we all did from President Trump, about his opinion that this is certainly no Churchillian moment for the British. They have been our closest ally, and I think because this was different, perhaps it was a fear. Well, that's a big difference, is that men and women who are unafraid will make the difference, and the British get to be able to make their choices when it comes to who they want to lead them into the future.
Deputy Ambassador Tammy Bruce, great to see you. Thanks so much for being here on a breaking news day.
Thank you.
Yes, thank
as
you.
they have been for many weekends now.
Right.
Thank you so much for being here.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube, and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.